Good to see you back. You know, it's really encouraging when the faculty sees that students have returned for the second session. So let me ask, is anybody having any issues? Let's start with any questions that you may have, like the use of the portal and the assignments. We'll be getting into the course material in a moment. And before you answer that, let me just mention that we have an update I think I mentioned to the portal that we're using that you guys basically will do most of your work. And this is, I think, the first class, first one I've had for sure that we've used this new system. And one of the attributes of this new system is this date and time stamping in regards to assignments. We've always kind of had a capability for tracking the assignments, but having specific times and be able to split them up between the initial and the replies is a new feature. And as you may have noticed, the assignments that we had upcoming all had the same due date. That's because the other weeks that we had, the dates haven't been updated. But I think they are now. So some of you probably had a moment of panic. Oh, no, we had more than one assignment due, but actually only one. And
yeah, I did. I thought we had a paper due today this week.
Yeah, no. Yeah, so I know some of you caught that, sent me an email, appreciate that. However, the paper is actually due next week. And so if you got started on it, we're actually going to include some of the concepts we are going to cover tonight that will be beneficial for your papers. So we're going to cover the core values in this session, and this will help inform your papers. So having said that, I think the dates have been changed for the assignments. I think they've been updated, but that was one of the things that was kind of a technical glitch in getting done. So if there's any confusion, apologize for that. But we have in NGS courses going year round. They never stop. Not like universities that may have fall and spring cohorts. We have starting all the time throughout the year. And so whenever there's an upgrade, whenever there's course revisions, one of the cohorts are going to be highly impacted by it. So that may be maybe you have updates. I don't think we have any other course changes upcoming. We've had a few this last year, but we take student feedback seriously. We always try to improve it. And so if there are some modifications, it will catch one of the cohorts, and so sometimes we really appreciate your feedback on those things, particularly if you're the guinea pigs, and we're kind of the guinea pigs for this new portal technology that we have had just implemented. So having said that, welcome back to the second part of a 5-part series. Let me ask, anybody have things that you would like to either comment on, questions on concerning the assignments or the use of the portal?
This is Megan. I have a quick question.
Sure, Megan.
On that, hey, how are you?
Good, thanks.
So on that video we're supposed to watch, how do we log in to watch it?
Oh, are you talking about the webinar recording?
No, the PDCA.
Oh, okay. I'm going to cover with you. Is the GIMBA membership. There is, it's really kind of a very neat feature, is that we have a GIMBA Academy, and I'll give you the approach how to log that in upcoming. But basically, as a part of the enrollment in NGS, we have a partnership with GIMBA Academy, which is a really well up-and-coming organization, but they have a lot of resources which are going to be available for you for the duration of your degree program. And that is, you'll be able to log in. I'll cover that with you, how to do that. There's a password for you as an NGS student. And there's a whole bunch of videos in there. Lean Six Sigma has whole school just dedicated to lean and a wide variety of subjects. They're about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. They're very short vignettes, well done. Got really excellent feedback on that. And that membership in the Gimba Academy is part of your, included in your enrollment. So this is something I'll cover with you a little bit later. And then there will be other videos and references that assignments you'll have in other courses that will reflect on that. So that's how you'll get to that one.
Okay, thank you. Because it said that it was due today, and we had to watch that video, and I couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, no, we'll get the link up to you. In fact, I'll try to cover. Well, if not this evening, I'll send out a message to you about logging in to the Gimba Academy and what's in it. And so the video that you have, that one here, you should be able to have access here shortly. And I think the due dates, I think that was one of the things we had to take a look at in regards to making some changes on it. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else anyone have questions on? Any difficulties going through the responses and such? Okay. A couple of things is that I'm going to go and cover some of your DQs, responses that we had in your definitions of quality. So think about that. I'd like to have a dialogue, including, if you recall the examples you had, what they mean to you, and that's going to be up front. Typically, with all the classes, is that the first portion of the class is that we will kind of introduce where we're going to be headed for that evening, but I also like to do a review from the previous week, just to reiterate key points, things you may have contemplated since the last time. Probably after you get off the webinar last time, you probably called your significant other, gathered the family around, and relayed stories about what you heard, right? And so there may have been a question that came up. Perhaps something you thought about over the week, but sometimes it's good to reinforce what we had covered, and so that as we move forward, that we have the ability to kind of build on each course and have the ability for you to, contemplate and come back and ask questions. So that is my practice. I'm not sure if all the faculty do that, but so as we start each course, we'll review the previous week's key points, things that you thought about, that what we talked about, or the readings, or things that are significant in DQs. And we're going to cover your discussion questions tonight and talk about them a little further to ferret out some more insights from what you guys posted. And where we're going to be headed tonight really is going to be talking a large part about just some of the foundational concepts around quality, things that perhaps we found that many people have come into this course and may have worked in quality for years and don't have much background about the evolution and some of the really founding concepts that now evolved into Lean Six Sigma, have evolved throughout the total quality management approaches. And we're going to talk about the value of those and how you might be able to use these in a very operational way, in addition to just understanding the concepts, but really the practical application of them. And we really want you to be able to then start to apply them. That's really what your the assignment for next week will be in regards to doing the paper, is to have write about some core values that will, at the very end of our course, we'll talk about the Baldrige and ISO related core values in that, and then your paper will be on that, and I'll cover that assignment in a little bit more detail, and also some of the other aspects. Let me just say, I had a chance, I went through and I've taken a look at your responses, and really some very good quality in there. I'm glad that you guys were able to think things through and put out personal examples. That's always something that we're going to be looking for. Whenever you do posts, if you can give examples, not only in your responses and the discussion questions, but in the papers you write, how you see it being applied. And then also adding, references and things that you may be able to share that really provides some validation or perhaps new insights. One of the things I was looking for too is that in your replies, did you ask maybe further questions of each other, and so that you were able to, hey, that's a great point, but could you tell me a little bit more about that? And then you replied back and kind of said, here's what I was thinking, and that exchange is exactly what we're looking for, having a dialogue amongst yourselves, and upon occasion, your faculty. I might come in and ask a question as I review it, even before the due date, and just say, hey, what are you talking about here, or can you expand on that type of thing. So that was really one of the first purposes of this assignment. And if you posted on Sunday, you were fine. If you got your initial post in, there were some, again, if you posted a little bit late, but if you got it on Sunday, I would give you credit. And as a guideline, what I find is that sometimes students, sit down over the weekend, sometimes it's Sunday morning with a cup of coffee, with scratching the dog's head or whatever you're doing, and you are doing your discussion questions. And then you have an opportunity, if you kind of get them in early in Sunday, your fellow students can then start responding to you. And so if you have them in on Sunday, my policy is that's fine, and then respond to two others. And it's just kind of out of courtesy, if you would, if you can get them in the earlier part of Sunday, so people can post and give you good responses and that type of thing. And I also encourage you to get around as you start to, look at other people's posts and do a variety, just not stick with the same students. So sometimes people kind of, oh, hey, I'm in the same industry as you, or, we've kind of hit a lot of commonality here. I, feel very comfortable. But it's really good to provide a diverse set of posts to different students as you go around to kind of see their style and what they've got to say. And building on that or giving them examples, that's exactly what we want to do. So, and then today was, when you should have completed the 2 replies to your fellow students on the whatever they posted. And so the initial post was Sunday, and then today, and I put there 6 o'clock as a kind of a deadline. And what it allows me to do, and perhaps other faculty, is to maybe harvest some ideas that you had, or maybe some key points you had in your discussion questions, and then reintroduce them into the material. And so that's what I've done tonight. I took the post that you had and highlighted some key points, not the complete post, but maybe some important aspects about that I thought may be valuable to share and to discuss. And but before we get into that, let me ask, from last week, what were some of the things that we talked about? Anybody remember some of the key topics that we, in our very first week, covered, and anything that you thought may have stuck out for you in regards to what we talked about? So who would like to go back and reflect on last week a bit? Don't all jump in at once now. And remember, if you are talking, it's probably you don't hear yourself. Maybe because you're still on mute. So anybody want to start? Just to remember what we covered last week from the webinar I'm talking about.
We go over some of the project management phases.
Yeah. Anybody remember what they are by heart?
I'll give it a try. Planning, initiating, executing, and closure.
Okay. Yeah, pretty good job. Get 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the 5. Somebody help them out?
Control.
Yeah, yeah, it's part of it. Yeah, control, monitoring controls, what they call it. Hey, excellent. Yeah, and fear not, you're going to have a class on project management upcoming, and it will be covering each one of those. In fact, the planning phase of that is a big fat one. I mean, there is huge amount of information in there, and we follow really the PMBOK approach, which is the project management body of knowledge. And so you have a whole class on that. You don't have to worry about memorizing it now, but just understand that our approaches kind of mirror that, and you'd be picking up and using tools from each one of those. So yeah, and initiating, planning, monitoring, control, execution, and closure. We'll be covering that in a lot more detail, but it's also good to know which phase you're in, because as we start to go through this, you'll be using tools that may be unique to each of these different phases of methodologies we have, and there's tool sets, quality tool sets and approaches that are kind of unique and to each one of these phases, and some that kind of be used in several one of them. So that's great. Okay, brave soul, started the discussion. What else did we cover last week that you thought was interesting or a key point?
We talked about the master's, what is the master's business project, definition of it, and the how it can be applied to any organization.
Okay, good. Yeah. Is anything particular out of that you thought?
Well, my thing was reading the definition. I was interested in how it could be applied to my organization because it's so complex. And being in the military, it's a military command. So trying to find a way how this could be applied, that's been on my mind since then.
Okay. Yeah. And we've had plenty of experience in the military, and a lot of the times, by the way, we find it's translation. If you can translate the business or the quality concepts into the language that people understand, a lot of times it's a lot more doable, and it becomes something that was very well, actually, like in the history of quality, and we'll cover this tonight. A lot of the concepts were foreign to, when I was in the military. Anything that we had previously, and just be able to see the applications translated in terms that they could understand and would be important. All right.
Yes.
We'll find a way. Or not. Okay. Thanks, Judith. That was Judith, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hey, be sure to announce yourself so we get to understand, get to know your voice or who's speaking. So thanks, Judith. Anybody else? Key points?
I'd say the team relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's Edgar, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Remember that the team relationships, right? And guess what? You're going to go through them, each one of you. And this is very important that you understand that every team, whenever you put a process improvement team, you put a Tiger team, if you pull like Cohort together like this, you're going to go through kind of each one of those phases. That's normal. It's just part of human nature. And in fact, one of the things that for those in the military, if you're on deployments and you leave and come back, the family dynamic is different as one of the things that occurs because maybe the family back home is, they've had to pick up different responsibilities. They've had different rhythms. They've had different, and then when people come back together again, you get through the same kind of phases. So these things apply. If you're not aware of them and know how to manage them and know particularly which stage you're in, you're going to be running into difficulties because a lot of quality is done through teams. And this will actually be one of the project management discussions because putting together your project team and selecting their skill sets and how you do that will be part of that discussion. but you're going to live it as you go through this. So that was one of the things we want to introduce you to, is that there are various phases, and you got to be able to start to name the behaviors that are associated with each one of those phases. You know, what do people do, you know, in the storming phase? What do they do in the norming phase? What do they do in the high performing phases? And so being able to kind of name the behaviors of the people and which stage they're in will allow you to figure out what you need to do to move them through those phases, because you really ideally want to get them all the way into the high performing if you can. And there's certain techniques that will be employed. In fact, we'll start with them when we put you together in teams for your first assignment. And one of the first things that's very helpful for team is to put together their ground rules. What's the operating norms? What's the approaches? We'll cover more of that next week. But yeah, so we introduced you to that. So thanks, Edgar. Anything else that you? MBPs, Master Business Process. Okay, we're going to give you some more criteria on that, but we kind of touched upon that. We talked a little bit about champions and their involvement. And we will give you some additional things that will help you be clear about the MVPs. But did you have any questions about that at this point from what we covered on the master business process? You know, either about how teams are done or in regards to any particular questions around the selection or other aspects of that? Okay. Let me send a note to everyone. I want to, and I ended up sending it to one student. I meant to send it to everyone. And particularly Matthew, who's joining us, be sure that he kind of knows what we're talking about at this point. And I meant to send that to the entire audience, that just covering the key points from last time. We will have later on another discussion about the master business process. What's the nature of them? What type of topics make really good projects and which ones don't? And so there'll be more to come on that. All right. Anybody have anything else you would like to add from last week's discussion? Okay. If not, let's transition a bit from where we were last week into this year. And hold on, let me make a quick answer here. I want you to think about what I've done here is extract what I thought was the key points that you had from your quality definitions that you posted. And I want to share that with the group tonight and have you talk about it a little bit. And as we go through this, because you're in a quality systems management course, what is that about? What's quality about? And so that's one of the first things we wanted to discuss, and just share your own perspectives about what you bring to the table. So on the first one up here that we had, this is the definition: the standard of something that is measured against other things of a similar kind, and the degree of excellence of something, and a distinctive attribute or characteristic possessed by someone or something. Judith, Ron, Megan, DiCalo, is it DiCalo? And Larry had posted and said, hey, these are some definitions that really mean something to us. And then I've taken each under students' definitions and kind of put it in here. So I would like for you to do is we're going to have a kind of go through this and see the some similarities, maybe some uniqueness upon this. Now we had these folks up here, Judith, Ron, Megan, and Larry. Could you give me some examples of why you chose this one as on a personal basis, because the drill was to determine what was quality. And could you give me maybe one or two examples that so if you would, out of the group that are up there on this one, could you just talk a little bit about why you selected this? And you wrote about it, but I'd like to just kind of hear your explanation.
Hi, Professor. This is Ron.
Uh-huh.
Well, one of the examples that I actually wrote down was on people's homes. You know, there's people who prefer living in the city as opposed to living in the country, but both are, you know, into the eye of the beholder, a quality item. So my thing was always surrounded the attribute is something that could be always moved and always kind of like a measuring stick until a collective or a group have the consensus to agree that it becomes a standard. And then once you have that standard, that's your standard that you can differentiate what is quality or what is not.
Interesting example. I mean, it really was. And so I thought that was, and you get some feedback on it, right?
Yeah, I got a lot of people really chiming in. I also, you know, made a comparison about cars. You know, people say that a Rolls Royce is one of the highest quality cars in the world, but is it practical? To me, sometimes maybe a car that I could actually take out every day and, you know, not worry about putting mileage or getting a dent in it is quality product to me. So yeah, I got a lot of feedback from that.
Okay. And you were, was this principally for the second definition or the first one? How do you see your example then of, you know, the rural life and its attributes?
It was basically on the focusing on the attribute first, because you know, quality in my mind should have kind of like an attribute and kind of like a measuring stick in which you can say something is quality or not quality. So when I was giving the examples with the houses, it changes because, you know, a group of people can get in a room and have different ideas about what a home is. So the distinct attribute was very important for me for quality. On the second definition, which was, you know, how to, once you get that standard, how to measure upon that, which is high quality or low quality.
And what's interesting, and I want you to kind of think about how each one of these definitions are kind of unique, and what you've kind of also, you know, talked about. It's, you know, you got individual opinions on it, and you have to kind of be able to talk about it as an approach. Thanks. You give one aspect. How about another member that provided these two up here? Judith, Ron, or
This is Judith. So my answers were mainly, they were mainly coming from my experiences, what I've seen while in the military, and that's why I totally focused on the first definition being the standard of something as measured against other things. Because when I first got in the Army, as we were speaking about how things have evolved since, we had to go through the process as well, living in certain barracks and gradually having them change to better quality, thus that affected our morale. And so that's how I measured it, because we were able to compare the two things, leave the two things, the two separate entities being in, I wouldn't say poorly set of barracks, but I mean, it was what we were used to. So once we were able to move to the new, very nice barracks, we were quite happy about that. So that's what I I made the comparison to measuring the two.
All right. And does this really kind of resonate with you as well? You know, is this, because you live, when you're in the military, you live it, right?
Yes, I was. Yes, as I said last time, my first duty station was at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and so now if you go there, it's so totally different. I had a chance to go back after many years, and it's not the same Fort Polk as I saw in 1996 when you're looking at Fort Polk in 2013. So it's really very nice how they've evolved it. It's so totally different.
All right.
Quality of life.
Quality of life. Okay. All right. Thanks. Megan, you want to skip in?
So for me, I guess it would relate more to the first one with my work, just because, we make bourbon and we have one product, and that quality has to upheld each time we make it. And I guess like an example of that would be like, for me, I wouldn't buy a cheap bottle of bourbon compared to Maker's Mark, which is about $40 to $50, just because of the quality.
Right. Is it actually in the name, Maker's Mark? Is this the mark of excellence? Do you know what the background of the name is?
Maker's Mark is what the Samuels family came up with. They originally started on the Samuels farm in Loretto, Kentucky, and Margie was the founder of Maker's Mark, and she's the founder of the shape of the bottle, and that's in all of our shutters that we have. And then she was actually in charge of making up the label, and we still hand print those today. So that's still another quality thing for us. We're the only ones that still have like a 1800 printer, and we manually cut all of our labels.
Okay. We'll cover that in a moment again about quality throughout the generations. It sounds like you guys are living it. Okay.
Yeah, we even still have wooden fermenters. And so, we have to keep those up withheld in quality because they've been there since the Samuels family started bourbon.
Okay.
So it's crucial for them to stay within quality standards and food safety standards and everything else.
Right. Okay. That is, and you're starting to qualify. Here's some other things that are involved with that. So, well, great. Thanks. That's a good illustrative example, I guess, of what you. We're going to kind of go through, and if you listen, we've had 3 examples from the first, and your views are all kind of a little bit different, right? Even though you had the same definition, but what it means to you, I mean, whether you're talking about home, or you're talking about bourbon, or you're talking about military, and the barracks, and whatever, the quality of life, is that your point of reference about what these, you may even have the same definitions, but your point of reference may be different. And that's really important as you go through your journey, is that a lot of times you find that people, when you're talking about quality, and one of the real reasons why we're doing this is for you to understand that people have different perspectives of what it means. And even if you have a common definition, people through their own experiences, their life journeys, knowledge and backgrounds may have a different view of it, even if you think you're talking about the same thing. And you all kind of selected those, this group here. But I suspect you have variations about what it truly means to you. And so that's important, because if you're going to go into an organization and say, we're going to improve the quality, what does that mean? And so just figuring out what that means and the approach that you'll take is just be aware of the diversity of opinions about that. Measure of a standard. Okay, one of the things that's important, because this is one of very common, these are very common, you'll see this often, and a lot of people do selected ones in the dictionary. Two, it's, usually gets, circulated largely on the internet as well. So it's a standard, right? And it has this idea of being measured. Measured means you have to quantify it. You have to be able to use some way to look at it, and using some type of criteria perhaps. And excellence, what does that mean? Degree of excellence. Well, it's kind of like defining quality. It's kind of one of those subjective things until you get that. And then this one talks about being unique. And so this idea, this distinctive attribute is that by someone or something is one aspect about that. And so what does that mean in regards to when you start to apply that? We're going to go through and start talking about these in a very operational way. I want you to think about examples that you have, very good examples about what do they mean to you. They're like bourbon, it's very distinctive, right? It's look at the way we do our labels, look at the taste, look at the way we do our process, look at all those things which makes it distinctive. It could be a part of that definition. So thanks, guys, appreciate that. Hey, let's go, Jay Carter. You had in here kind of a different take, good and reliable in there, right? And you also kind of you talked about process and the in process. Could you talk just a little bit about what you thought about when you put this thing together?
Hi, this is Jay.
Hey, Jay.
In my definition, I had a quality of a person. I think that was my first one. In the military, the quality of a person is very important to us. If I've got a guy beside me, I have to know that he's reliable and that I can trust him. Also, morals. I need to know that everybody on our team, that we've got the same, if not the same, at least common standards and beliefs. A lot of things that come down to us from the powers that be, we don't necessarily believe in them, but we all have the same end goal and same standards to come down. And in the military, we have to follow them. That's just the way the rules are there. And morals, it's just good to have good morals. You just need to know that the person that you're downrange with fighting, that they're reliable. Also, where I work in aircraft maintenance and quality for the end product. I need to know that I can trust an individual to send them out on a task to work on this multi-billion-dollar aircraft, and I know his work is good.
And you're just kind of describing what and how important is all of these things to you in the military, right?
Yeah, they're gravely important, because if I send somebody out there and this person, I can't trust them, they're of bad character, then pilots die. It's a life and death. Even if we're not on the aircraft and we're downrange fighting in harm's way, I cannot rely on this person or trust this person. People die. I die. So quality of person is very important. Quality of the end product, which would be the aircraft, is very important.
I want to kind of build on a couple of things. One, you're starting to describe what a quality organization looks like. You talked about values. It talks about shared beliefs in those values. It talks about what the people in the organization have. In other words, how do they act in that organization? And you made a couple of good points here that I want to just maybe draw out. Having been in the military, I really do agree with you about that, because I was in combat arms for a number of years, and the difference is that if you have poor quality, there are things like casualties and things that are serious consequences. In the business world, in translating that is, well, you go out of business, right? You lose market share. You go for Chapter 13. You go for bankruptcy. So the consequences of poor quality in the business world may not be life and death necessarily, but often organizations, if they don't have that motivation, if they don't see the connection between impacts of having poor quality and that organization, they may not necessarily see the reason for having quality, because it requires, you know, a pretty high standard, requires some things, and some people are not comfortable with that. So what's the consequences of something not working well, you know, in the organization? Is there any consequences to that? And when we start looking at your projects, I want you to think about that and kind of expand what Jake just brought up, is that quality sometimes absolutely necessary because because the consequences are huge if they don't have it. And if the consequences aren't there, then how do you instill that? How do you instill that pride and that need to have quality, to continuously improve, and what are the motivation of things? So think about it in that way as well. So these are really good definitions, because I want you to, as you go through this course, it's like getting a tool bag, right? Whatever you got in your tool bag now, and each one of you has a tool bag with different quality tools, different ideas and concepts, but hopefully as you go through the course, you're going to add new ones into that. And so I want you to have a broad set of quality definitions so that you can use it in a lot of different ways, and then appreciate the differences between them and how they may be applied in different circumstances. So great. Hey, Jay, thanks for that. A really important one, and certainly you're living this, and this idea of characteristics and a personal one, it certainly applies to organizations, as you indicated, and good and reliable. In other words, the other thing is it good and reliable? In other words, can you depend on it, right? Was one of the other things I thought was very operational of that. Hey, Matt, I've asked Matt, I sent him a chat, and I haven't had a chance to read his reply, but if you go to the chat and see what Matt has, if you have any comments and you want to share, maybe I'll chat back with him. But I thought he had a very interesting point. And let me just take a moment, if you will, too, go to the chat room. As you know, Matt will both be communicating with us through chat at this point. So let me take a look and off. Let me, as you're reviewing this, is that conformance to requirements, good and reliable, but how about if somebody went through and gave it their all, right? You ever see anybody run like a marathon? Any of you out there marathon runners? Huh? You ever do like those, you know, crazy 26 point something miles out there? Huh? No marathoners out there? But if you start an attempt to run a marathon and he only made it to 25 miles, would you say that's a quality effort? You know, if somebody made that attempt and fell short, in other words, they didn't achieve the aim of going across the goal, they didn't necessarily run the complete race, and if that individual, maybe this is their first marathon, maybe this is something that they have physical incapacity, and they decided to try to go out there and apply themselves. And when I read his initial post, one of the things that struck me about that is that what is a quality effort? Are people working up to their potential? It's another way maybe to say that. Is that if they are giving 100% of their effort, you know, some people, you know, some of you, A's will come very easy for you in this course because you know the material, you know how to do the academic part, you know how to apply things, and some may struggle. And sometimes it's where you are and that you evaluate their effort. I remember, like in martial arts, is that some people, you know, who are long-legged and got great reach and very, you know, quick, you know, they have innate ability. It's like sports. But if somebody is out there just trying their heart out to run their best, it's like kids in Little League as well. You know, if they're out there just giving it their all, but they really just are not natural athletes, is that not quality? That they're giving their all and their best? And so it's the level of effort. And so maybe another way to think about quality is that are all members of the organization providing their best? Is that organization all it couldn't be? You know, it's the old Army thing that a long time ago, be all you can be. But that is sometimes what you want to evaluate as well. Is there capacity in this organization to go beyond where they are currently? Are they all giving their effort? Are they getting the best ideas out of their workforce? Are they really providing a good effort in to make improvements? So I thought that was one of the things that Matthew brought up, and then his post added some additional ones from here. It kind of inspired me because of that reason. So, and if you got any questions or anything that you want to ask Matt, please use the chat to send him a note. Let's go through this other thing because I want to cover the other materials we have tonight, but I want to be sure that we've kind of talked about this. Hey, Dave, let's see, are you on?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dave. Okay. First of all, Duran and Deming, you got my two pop heroes up there, so, you know, that's great. You got plenty of points for that. Would you like to add anything on to your definition here?
No, I mean, not a whole lot to say. I mean, I work in the industry where we do a lot of research and development, and quality, depending on what information you're given, can vary widely.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain, but like we have a situation right now at work where we were given the wrong design parameters. We made a product, we went through tests with it, and then when it went into application, it didn't work. Well, at first, it was considered a quality issue. We went through all kinds of testing and everything, and then figured out that they'd given us the wrong design parameters to begin with. So it was actually a design issue and had nothing to do with the quality of the product we built.
Okay. You know, a couple of things that you added in your definition, I want to just kind of highlight that may be a little bit different from what we've seen up to this point. One is that it is predictable, that quality is predictable. In other words, when I jump in the car and I turn the key and it starts every time, that's predictability. And so one of the things that you kind of introduced in your definition here is predictability, is that one of the things about quality is that can we know what the future forecast, what it's going to be? How is that process going to perform not only today, but tomorrow and so on? So quality allows you to do that. When we talk about Dr. Deming later, he'll talk about reducing variation. In other words, that's one of the big sins. That's one of the things we really do with Six Sigma and try to reduce the variation that occurs in processes and products and activities within an organization. And so you try to, the more you can get it down to being predictable, where you know how it's going to perform, was one of his key tenets. And that was one of the things I really kind of picked up out of that definition. So thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
Yep. Well, and in the manufacturing industry or manufacturing situations, we run into that all the time, where keeping variation low and making sure that the processes are repeatable every single time reduces scrap and reduces rework.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, in manufacturing, you have, I mean, that is huge. I mean, you've got a lot of, you know, very key set of measures. It's probably measured, right? Those are really tracked, I would think, into its degree. Is that your situation?
Yeah, I mean, we have reports run daily on rework, scrap, and run charts for process control.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the follow of those in a moment. And again, you know, what you measure is very key. So you've got some great points here we're gonna build upon in a moment. So thank you. Hey, Cameron, how about yours? One of the things that you noticed in this one here is that you got defined by the customer. Okay, defined by the customer, and you talked about measure of excellence. Again, that idea of excellence. But Cameron, anything you want to add to this one?
Yeah, I just think that in order to produce the best quality product, you kind of need to understand what the customer wants from your product. And once you understand what exactly they want, it allows you to save time and money on, you know, say an attribute of your product that the customer may not care much about, and it allows you to focus more on another aspect of your product.
Well said. And this is actually one of the things we will really emphasize. It's really a core tenet. Is that, and a lot of times that organizations can say, okay, well, this, you know, we don't have any scrap out of this. The product is actually meets all these conformance requirements, and but it's not what the customer wants. Motorola had an example of that when they started out with Lean Six Sigma. They actually, back then, if you guys, you know, if you're dinosaurs, knew before there was actually cell phones, people used pagers. Pagers was like an incredible everywhere. You know, instead of picking up your smartphone, you sent somebody a page that you wanted to talk to them or something like that. And so paging was the precursor to everything that we carry in our pockets and probably in your hands right now. But when they started doing Lean Six Sigma, they went to try to get Six Sigma out of that. In other words, how do we get these pagers down to Six Sigma the last 20 years, right? To get it defect-free, high quality. Well, customers didn't want that, right? Because in order to make a product that high level, they had to put a lot of resources into it, had to get it down to such a degree that it was very expensive. And who wants a pager that's going to last you 20 years, right? You know, I don't know if any of you got one sitting on the shelf someplace, but why would you want to have something that's going to be outdated by, you know, trends and technology probably in 6 months, or 20 months for sure, much less 20 years. And so sometimes quality, and defined by what the customer truly needs, that's absolutely one of the key tenets. It allows you to figure out not, you know, you can get to perfection, to excellence, you know, develop something that's at Six Sigma, which means it has almost no defects to it. But is that what the customer needs, and what would be the cost of that? So that's the other part of the discussion. So that's a key thing. Cameron, anything else you want to add on that?
No.
Great, thanks. Hey, Edgar, I thought you had a very interesting reflective response here. Could you just expand a little bit what you meant? Edgar, are you still there? Or if you are, you may be on mute. I got you twice on mute. Okay. Yeah, I think you had a very important observation about quality, is that it's a personal measurement, right? It's unique to each person. Is that what you meant, or could you?
Yeah, it is a personal, to me it is a personal measurement or a personal value that you assign to something. And it starts off with each individual, because you bring on your knowledge and what you know, or what you define as your own personal quality, and then you grow it over time. You develop it more with new things that you learn, whatever you're nurtured with, and it just grows from there.
Okay. All right. I thought it was a key point. And as we said at the very beginning, each of us has a different set of understanding what quality is, and expanding this to understand, and that it is a couple of things I thought also that you had in here. It's not only personal, but over time. In other words, it changes. It's not consistent, right? If you know, had a website for your business up in the business world, if you're a small business, well, you couldn't compete really in the you know, with others that didn't. I mean, if you didn't have a website, you couldn't compete with those that did have a website. Now, if you don't have an app that you can, you know, people find on their smartphone, then you're really not a quality organization contacting your customers. So maybe that's what they really want. And so the idea that quality continually evolves, and what may be true for quality last month, last year, last 6 years, 10 years? How has that changed? And because those things, those standards, customer's perception continually changes based on the market, and it continually evolves. So I thought that was another important aspect in here. So when you start to talk about what is quality, and when you go in and start talking about these projects that you'll have, when you start doing this, is what do we need to improve? What's the customer's requirements, and how do you know? And how do you know it's current? And how do you know how it will be viewed in the future? And so this idea, that quality isn't just one set of standards, it is one that evolves perhaps. So thanks for your post. It's a very, very good one. Let me continue on real quick and cover what else we had. Larry, are you on? Okay, I don't see Larry, right? Unless he's phoned in anonymously here. And Sam.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Sam. Talk to me a little bit about this one here. Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is essentially what we use, especially in the intelligence field, as far as constant improvement of intelligence products, ensuring that you're doing reporting and analysis correctly the first time, because at the end of the day, lives depend on it. So you want to make sure you're always doing the best that you can and ensuring that you're answering all the customers' requirements.
Okay. Yeah. And the other thing I thought was really high in your definition, which was kind of unique from some of the others, is doing the right thing, doing the right thing right first time. In other words, we get it done first time through right every time. That's really kind of one of the definitions of excellence, of almost Lean Six Sigma, is that as you start to go through, do the right thing. That's important. And you do it the first time, not go through rework, not have any scrap, not having it, any of these other 1,000 iterations of trying to get it right, or getting overtime because we didn't do it right the first time, whatever that might be. So that's another aspect about a definition of quality, which is huge, I think. So, and it's one that you, and your military environment that's put in here. So it's kind of a combination, and then you added also the customer aspect. So the purpose, again, was for you to think about it, but the second part of this drill here is that I want you to just realize that open up your heads to a lot of different things, new perspectives. If you're in an organization, how is it defined? How is quality defined in your own organization? And if you have differences of opinion about what that is, how far do you think you're going to be if you could say, we need to improve the quality around here? Are you talking about how we satisfy a customer, or how do we meet this policy or this regulation standard or this safety requirement? Or are we talking about the people in this organization? Do they believe that this is, the operator equipment interface? Do the people have the right skills? Are they the right quality people that have the right, what are you talking about? And when you say that, a lot of times that's where the conflict is. People have different views about what they're working on. And so sometimes you need to be able to have a large number of definitions to say, what are we really talking about here in regards to improving quality? What are you going to have as your skill set when you graduate from this course? You're going to be a quality systems management professional. You're going to have that. What does that mean? And if you start to think about all these things, that you're able to deliver better than and provide advice, how to satisfy customers, how to define what the standards are and measure that, how to basically have processes that are predictable. All these type of things, maybe the things will guide your actions and your activities over the course of this degree program, and also your workplace perhaps. It is historical. Let's just talk a little bit about this. We're going to talk a little bit about concepts, about backgrounds here tonight, about the history and some of the things that may be helpful. So let me ask you a question. Have you ever been successful at something that you did not conceptually understand? Let me have you think about that for a minute. Have you ever been successful at something that you did not intellectually understand. What do you think about that? And a lot of people would say, yeah. Hey, boss, I get you this report. I don't know why you need it, what you're going to do with it, but here it is. Okay. I've accomplished the mission. And you may not have any idea why it's doing done. They want it. Okay. We've developed that. And so it usually is better, though, if you understand the concepts, if you understand the reason behind something. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to pop open your heads. We're going to pour in some ideas, cover some of the things which are basic to the foundations of quality. You may know them, and some of you may be great students of this, and chip in if you like and add comments as we go through about some of what the gurus have said. The ones that have established the quality that we're involved with now in this degree of body of knowledge that we will be covering with you. And let it know that there's also a historical perspective. So sometimes these are invaluable to understanding where the concepts come from and the reasons that they evolve. And one of the things that we talk about, it's been around for a while. Quality is, we kind of think about, this body of knowledge really did not exist in the form that we think about now. There wasn't a lot of, it's like mathematics, to a large degree where, you have this body of knowledge throughout. It is more evolved in the 20th century than it ever has been. And so in the quality movement of that, we'll talk about tonight, really around 1980 or so that it really kind of kicked off. There was kind of spurts and things like that, but not in the U.S. Until about then. So it's a fairly recent body of knowledge around management and improvement that we are investigating now. But some of the tenets that go all the way back through history, if you think about the pyramids, right? Well, this would take your definition, right? Did they comply to the standards? Yeah. Did they measure stuff? Absolutely. Okay. And that was one of the key components that enabled them to have this thing of beauty that people over thousands of years go and make pilgrimages and visits and vacations and see one of the wonders of the world. One of the wonders of the world. And that's another attribute about quality. It endures. That you do something and you create quality, it attracts attention. It provides long-lasting results. I bet you if I were to ask the folks that the organizations you've ever been in, and some of you may have been in many, some of you, particularly in the military, go from one unit to another, or you have commanders come in and change the environment, or some of you may have had organizations where you changed up the same organization, but it was different because you had a new crew that was in charge with different visions, is that you'll probably remember those quality times, the time that you were in a high-performing organization for the rest of your life, and it influenced you and imprinted upon you. And so that's one of the other aspects about that, is that measurement was very important. The comparisons that they used in how they evaluate this, they made one pyramid, they figured out how that worked, they made bigger ones and more. So they learned. There's a learning cycle that goes back through history. And so the other thing is, as you mentioned here, there's kind of this intrinsic value of quality, that it attracts quality and admiration. And whenever you have a quality product, that's going to be. You as students through here, you'll be attracting attention to your projects. You need to do a quality job. You need to demonstrate the same values personally and skills that you want the people in that organization to emulate. So think about this as we go forward, and how do you apply that? Actually, one of the things that drove quality forward is that before the Middle Ages, and really where there were skilled craftsmen, a lot of the knowledge wasn't being captured. In other words, somebody would just make something and then they would sell it and off it would go. But what occurred then is that they started to establish guilds, and they started to transfer the knowledge about how they did particular things, because people found out that maybe a potter or somebody that made clothing or other type of products, the ones that made the highest quality with the most beautiful colors and designs and lasted, durable, they sold more of that. They were making more money. than anybody else. And once they figured out how to do that, they said, well, how do we take your techniques and then pass it on to generations so we don't lose that ability to be affluent or be better than others. So just basic, drive to, in the competitive market, quality really became important. And that was one of the reasons that they set up apprenticeships, and that one of the reasons they valued that. And even today, just listen to what Megan said. Did she talk about craftsmanship? We're still doing it this way. This is our family history. And when you hear that, you equate that to quality, right? Because you know that they are passing norms and procedures and cultural things down through that. And one of the things when you go into an organization is, what's their culture there? Are they passing information down through the organization, from the more experienced people to the young ones? How do they bring people in, and do they apprenticeship them on how we do things in an organization? So what they also realized, that quality, you can charge more for it. In other words, people are willing to pay more for it. So there's a very important aspect about what's the motivation, and quality will move significantly forward because of that, because of the ability. Here on this chart is an evolutionary one. It's kind of the lineage of that. As I mentioned, the body of knowledge really, and really when we're going to start talking about, the Frederick Taylor's kind of when we start to say the modern quality concepts. A lot of the things you are going to be covering here in this body of knowledge, this degree program, will be from the folks that are on this list, and from the programs and approaches that are involved from that. And you'll be applying some of the tools that came out of this. So let's just talk about that for a moment. And we'll be covering the Frederick Taylor and the Stewarts and Demings and a little bit more, but basically the quality aspects is that it really had a lot of initial roots under 1900s, but where it got mass produced was actually right after World War II. And in World War II is that, Japan, Far East, Europe for the most part was destroyed. The production plants, the manufacturing plants all bombed out. It was basically wiped out. And there were some folks that came from the United States, went over there and helped rebuild them. Under MacArthur's regime and then the Marshall Plan, we put a lot of money into rebuilding up that these infrastructures for everything from the car industries to such. But in addition to the buildings and the plants, we sent over some folks that really were the fathers of quality, Duran and the Deming, for instance. And what happened also, a part of that, is that because there wasn't much competition, the United States had a huge manufacturing base. It was untouched during the war. They had a wonderful amount of resources that everybody else didn't have. And so there wasn't much competition because we were the only ones in town. And what occurred was, when there isn't any competition, when there isn't any measure against something that's maybe of higher quality, maybe a better price, we start to slip, and really slip significantly in the 70s, late 70s and the 80s, and where basically this is when the Toyotas and the Hondas and the Canons started invading the U.S. market from Japan, that they were getting on their feet after the World War II, and they were producing things at higher quality than United States manufacturing. Canon, for instance, the copiers that came in from Japan, Xerox was actually, the name. If you're going to make a copy of something, let's go Xerox it, right? I mean, it became part of vocabulary. Well, Canon came in and started making copiers that basically undercut Xerox. They were making them at and selling them for the cost that Xerox had just in manufacturing. So they couldn't compete. They couldn't make a profit. I remember going in and looking at a Ford Mustang. I was stationed overseas and coming back, and after Mercedes and BMWs and those really high quality cars, looked at a Ford Mustang in the showroom, and you're afraid to kick the bumper because it might come off. that was that bad. And so what occurred was basically is that we started to figure out that we had lost the economic edge, that we no longer was the manufacturing power in the U.S. And so that's really kind of what was the incentive. It's always kind of the, survivability is important. And so those concepts from them developed to run to a lot of the total quality management approach that you may hear. And the concepts we're hearing tonight and the ones you can be applying really evolved out of that. So in 1980, is really kind of kicked off. We'll talk about Deming in a moment. The Navy coined a term called total quality management. It actually applied to nuclear submarines and the development of that, but somehow that got caught on to the movement. And there was a Baldrige Award back in 1987 that really helped to capture best practices and lessons learned and widespread incentivize people to not only practice high quality, but look to these organizations that won this award as role models so others can emulate. And so then Lean Six Sigma Six Sigma out of Motorola kind of got born in 1988. It was not Lean Six Sigma at that point. It was primarily Motorola, and Toyota was already using Lean practices, and later on these two concepts got married and slammed together. But basically, you can look at the late 1980s and then the progression of this as we go through. And so one of the things that you should take away from this is that the body of knowledge and understanding of knowledge or understanding of practices and how you do this is not consistent. It is continuously evolving, that you need to be continually looking at the body of knowledge, what others' best practices, how this is evolving. In the books and what we're going to teach you in this course, we try to get the latest about those practices in the business world, in the industries, and then introduce them back in. And so, this, if you had a degree in quality, 10 years ago, it's deappreciated. It's kind of like a used car. If anybody bought a used car, or buy a new car, right? What happens as soon as you drive that thing off the parking lot, right? Well, it deappreciates. As soon as you leave the parking lot, it's not the same price, even though you're paying for it, as it was when it was on that lot. It's now a used car, not a new car. And so same thing about the education that we have is that if you had been well versed in quality 10 years ago, well, we've evolved a lot from that. A lot of the concepts have changed since then, and that's important for you to know. What is the future? Some of you may be shaping that. You may be shaping it for your organization. A lot of this is about hybriding things and putting it together. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So any questions or comments on that? All right, well, let's continue our journey down through history here. And we'll talk about the gurus that have shaped a lot of this. That's what I call gurus, but basically they're individuals that have profoundly contributed to what we have is our concepts and approaches. Basically, and we talked about the Deming and Duran are probably the two most notable. And they basically have established institutions that have lived way beyond them now, that have contributed to a body of knowledge that's influenced the world. We'll talk later about the Baldrige criteria, but if you're over in Europe, for instance, they have a thing called EFQM, European Foundation for Quality Management. If you go into the Middle East, that is pretty much a standard what they use in regards to that, along with ISO. So we'll talk about that body of knowledge. But there's institutions out there, and ASQ is one of those that is a collection point for all of the body of knowledge that it has. If you're a quality professional, typically you're a member of ASQ. And by the way, I will put into the portal a listing of all the memberships and software and other discounts you can get as a student. But you can get a student discount for if you're not already at a fairly good deduction from what a regular membership would be. And they're a great body of knowledge for certifications. They're widely recognized for anything that if you want to go for a certification, is that if you got it from ASQ, you generally will be accepted just about anywhere in the United States, and generally also worldwide regards to those certifications. But they're got stringent standards, and they collect it. So these organizations continue to help with the evolution of quality as well as provide resources. And we recommend you take advantage of this. I'll talk a little bit more about, if you're interested in the Baldrige, how to get involved with that if you so desire. And so let's just talk briefly about some of the major concepts. Frederick Taylor was one of the ones that I guess really kind of started to apply the scientific approach. And the way he took about this was that he kind of looked at an organization kind of like a machine. That he went in and looked at the processes, the manufacturing process. He looked at it, started to provide scientific methods about that. Kind of thought about it like a clock, right? You can take it apart and you can make the cogs maybe fit a little better, and be sure the timing of everything works great, and kind of looked at it that way, and added a lot through that analysis because he provided the rigors that you apply in normal scientific approaches. But one of the things that he kind of ran into in that is that, well, people didn't like being considered machines, right? He kind of thought people were like another, cog in the whole system, and really didn't understand the psychology part of that Deming later picked up on. But so he brought the scientific method, which was greatly inspirational, and began really our journey to start collecting data and using this in a way that do that. He did encounter some drawbacks to his approaches, and particularly they were around the human aspect about that, which reinforces, I think, at least in my opinion, that everything you do in this course and everything when you apply to your project, probably the hardest part of this is trying to get the people to buy into it. What are the motivations things? What are the quality persons aspect about this, about how do you address that? And so that's one of the key findings from him, but he is one of the founding fathers, if you will. Sheward, again, then he had statistical process control. This is a control chart. One of the things you'll understand is that he started looking at variations, started looking at trends, but he applied a lot of statistical background into that and greatly influenced Dr. Deming, who probably overshadowed him in his accomplishments. But that's a simple thing. He added how do you measure things? How do you measure things and look at trends, and how do you look at that in terms of variation? So he is one of the important contributors for that. This is sometimes called the Sheward cycle, plan, do, check, act. Many of you may be familiar with this, but this is a reoccurring theme. Your projects are kind of similar to this. We're going to plan out your projects. We're going to go out and collect data. You're going to apply maybe some of your recommendations, which is the do part of this. In other words, you're actually going to try to implement it if you can, your recommendations in your project, and then observe them and say, hey, did they work? And you pilot them to see if you can learn something from it. And then which is the check part, and then you revise and improve it based on what you saw. And that's kind of the same thing we talked about the pyramids, right? They planned them out. Hey, I want a monument to myself. I'm a divine pharaoh. Let's have a pyramid, okay? And so they built small ones, and they learned how to this, and then how to shape them, and they took that, then applied them to improving their methodologies to the other ones. And they, measured and everything else. They went through that, but there was a learning cycle, even to pyramid building. It's going to be a learning cycle to your projects as you go through. It's a problem-solving methodology, if you will, PDCA. It's very powerful and very common. Sometimes you'll have the word O in front of it for observe, which means that you may go out and measure something first. So it's OPDCA. Deming didn't like check. He put study because he thought check meant inspections. But sometimes it's called the Sheward cycle. That's what Dr. Deming called it. But Sheward was really the one that kind of came up with the concept, and that was the one that they always had. So it's a very powerful one. And some organizations, they say, what is your approach to improving problems? They'll say PDCA. This is what we do. We identify things. We then figure out how to set goals, improve the process, Then we go implement the things that we think will improve, and we observe them to see if they hit the target. And if they didn't, we refine them and improve them. Very simple. That's it. So, any questions on that? Okay. Deming is one of the guys that I had an opportunity to actually hear, and he was made lectures. One of the things he did in his life was wrote a lot. He wrote a book, Out of Crisis, and several others, economics, and one or two others I can't recall right now, to include observing, I think it was a naval, Cherry Point was written up in one of his books. But Dr. Deming basically, and they were lectures, and there's where they started to bring the information they had. They went to Japan after World War II to help rebuild, and they took a lot of the information like from Sheward and the statistical, and then started applying it over there, and made huge gains over there, and hugely respected by the Japanese. They even, their equivalent of national awards or based after the Deming Prize, for instance. And so this is kind of the time frame when they started introducing quality into Japan after the place was starting to rebuild and start to prosper, is that the people were very receptive not only to the rebuilding but to new ideas, and these guys represented that. And they worked on the Hawthorne project, Sheward, along with Deming, and basically they trained people within the military initially, and then they took it back over. That's how the connection occurred. And back in 1980, there was a TV news special that NBC had, and Deming got up there and talked about quality, talked about what Japan had did. And then in the terms now we would call it, it went viral. It went viral. People just caught on. Hey, why can't we? What is he talking about? And so he came up and started talking about his concepts, which we'll briefly cover, that became the foundation for a lot of, well, just took his principles. The Department of Navy, for instance, had a Deming study group. In fact, a lot of Deming worked a lot with the Department of Navy, and they had a lot of his disciples that worked under Deming became much involved in the military. But he also got involved with the renovation, refurbishment of Ford. I remember one of the stories is that they brought him in, and he was going to help Ford get back into the automotive leadership position. And so he walks, the president of Ford, has this huge kickoff meeting, and everybody's filled up in the room, and Dr. Deming was going to be the speaker for the kickoff. The president makes the big announcement, and he leaves the podium, walks off the stage, and Dr. Deming gets up and does the same thing, walks off the stage. And catches up with the president, and he says, "What are you doing here?" With this big panic face, he said, "If you're not in the room, you're not participating, this is not going to work." So that was one of his themes, that leadership needs to be engaged. That this is something that is not done in isolation, that you have to be engaged. And so he basically, Quality One and the Taurus and all those type of things came out from a lot of the principles and things that he had laid down. And he was like I say, a lecturer, but he did it in his older age when he was in the late 80s. And he's a grumpy old guy. He was, he had a very deep voice, but boy, he would call people out. And his concepts, though, were sold out. He was like a pop star, early ages of the quality. Let me just quickly talk about some of these principles he talked about. First, he said that, what's your theory? Just think about this right now. Do you have a theory about how you're going to manage an organization? Does your organization have a theory about how it's going to go about making change? If you're in mathematics, you use the theory, various theories out there to solve problems, right? If you're in physics, you understand theory of gravity, laws of physics. You apply that in your workplace. And his analogy was that you need to have a theory. You need to have an approach about how you're going to bring about change. And so he said, for instance, if you just have the number 2 and another one over here, unless you know the theory of multiplication and division and addition, they're just symbols. They mean nothing until you apply that theory to it. And so you said, this is what you need to have when you're managing an organization. What is your theory about how you're going to go about making improvements? And so 4 components of that. 1, you need to understand the organization as a system. And this is really, really important, guys and gals, is that whenever you're going to do something, if you're going to go out and improve this project, there's going to be another part of that system that you're going to influence. Organizations are a lot like people, I think. You may, think about people that you've met. Each one has an individual personality and stuff like that. But if you go into each organization, if you've ever worked in, didn't each one of them kind of have a personality? And they have a different way of doing things. They may be the same organization under the same umbrella, and maybe under the same headquarters, maybe a different manufacturing plant that's a twin. But you walk into it, the culture may be different. The equipment may be the same, the approaches for doing it, but each individual organization are like individuals. And if you got to understand that whatever you do is that like individuals, if you hit your, part of your body, your thumb or your finger or something like that, it's just not your thumb or your finger that hurts. It's you feel bad all over. And this idea that you need to understand how things are connected in an organization. So if you make an improvement in one aspect, like you improve a manufacturing process, well, you need to be able to say, well, what have I done to the poor guys in warehousing? Maybe producing a widget at a higher rate, much more efficient, but maybe they're running out of storeroom because they're, they can't move them quick enough, and we got all this stuff piling up, or it sub-optimized the process. So the idea is that you really need to look at an organization. We'll give you a couple of templates that are going to help you with that, but understanding that system of theory of system, that whatever you touch, whatever you improve, there are going to be other parts that will be affected by that. And when we talk later about the Baldrige criteria, this is really helpful for seeing how you might do this. Theory of variation is the other thing he was really big on, is that there is no 2 processes the same. There's no 2 products, basically identically the same. And the idea is that, things vary, and you want to decrease the amount of variation in that, as we talked about that before, is that you really want to have a consistent, predictable process. And with variation, we made it this way at this cost this time, and we made it this way at that time. Well, you can't predict it. So quality is also about reducing that. He said you really need to know the organization. You need to have how it works, right? You need to have a good understanding of the system, how all the things work in the organization. So it's theory of knowledge. And then the thing about people, you need to know what motivates people. You need to know what incentivizes them and how they think. And that is true. And you will find that each organization, like I said, has an individual set of culture. They may have people hired from a particular community. If you go over to Japan, try to do some improvements over there, it's a different culture than over here. Same is true from each one of your perspectives. So understanding what not only is the psychology that kind of generally motivates all organizations or people, but what is particular motivators in the organization. Like I'm working in an organization now that has a very gray profile. They have a lot of people that have like 20 years or more. And what's driving them is not, promotions and, neat, shiny things. It's sustainment, just being there until retirement. And how do you motivate and get people to do things to improve in that environment versus one where you've got, 20-somethings that want to make their mark on the world. So understanding that and how that's unique to each organization is important. And here's his 14 points. A lot of organizations just took this and said, if I'm going to put a quality program into an organization, this is what we're going to do. And I'll just highlight a couple of things. One is that be sure you're continuously focusing on improvement, this constancy of purpose. In other words, there's some organizations try to do like 42 different management techniques out there, and there's like 42 of them since World War II. There's theory X, theory Y, zero defects, all sorts of things. And some people go out and say, okay, well, I'm going to try improving it through Lean Six Sigma. Okay, oh, then we're going to go out and we're going to do some benchmarking, or we're going to apply, turbo process reengineering, whatever they might be. And even their constancy of purpose of how they're doing the improvement drives an organization crazy, and because they're changing methodologies and approaches and not building on it, or they're bringing a contractor in, for instance, who has one approach and somebody else has a different approach. So it's not only a devotion to continually improving an organization's constancy of purpose and continuing to focus on that, it's a constancy of approaches. Now, what's the approach you're using? A lot of organizations are very consistent. They have, like UTC, they've got an approach they've been building on, and that other organizations, some of them, they're trying the flavor of the month type of thing. And he really said, get away from inspecting. Inspecting quality in is not what you should do. You should build it in. In other words, there shouldn't be a reliance on QC people looking at and then catching the mistakes. You should have somebody who should be focused on the process and eliminating the mistakes before they occur. So instead of having a large army of people looking at conformance to requirements at the end of the process, you should have people, figuring out how to prevent the problem from happening. And that would be the focus. So that was his mantra in behind that. And it also talks to you in regards to you thinking about career choices. You want to be trying somebody that's working up on the process to eliminate projects and problems before they occur, or primarily involved in looking at inspecting things to see whether they meet standards. There's usually both of those components in an organization, but one needs a different skill set than the other one. One is kind of looking at complying and ensuring that things are measured right, that the set of requirements are being met, and another one is using the tools and processes for improvement. So those are a couple of things they talk about in here. Drive out fear. Some people in organizations is that they actually have the opposite philosophy. We're going to drive fear into the organization, right? That if you don't do well, we're going to fire you, right? If we're going to start measuring things and we find you to be deficient, you're going to be fired. And so you just, contrary to what Dr. Deming said, is that you try to eliminate fear from an organization, from fear of taking risks, fear of making failures, fear of personal consequences for broken systems. He said, fix the system, not fix the people. So break down departments and things like that, barriers, and ensure that you give people a sense of pride, kind of like, what you guys were talking about throughout, the importance of the individual sense of quality, that you identify your own personal quality with the quality of the organization. It's very difficult for a high quality person to do well in a low performing organization if they're continually getting beaten down for being that high performer. And so there's a lot of things we'll talk about later on, and we'll talk about the HR part of this, as I mentioned, is very important. But there's the 14 points. Okay. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to continue through and let me, see if there's other questions as we go through. But basically, Deming's paradigm, which was a big shift, is that focus on improving the productivity, the efficiencies of your process. And that will decrease your cost, right? You do things better, faster, cheaper. You'll be able to produce more because of that. And then you'll capture more because you're doing that. And then you'll stay in business while the rest of the folks go out of business. So that was his philosophy. It worked in Japan. And then when the United States started to adopt this, it really helped them change out. So a lot of times the initial focus was on the bottom line. In other words, how do we decrease cost, okay, as opposed to the step before that? How do we improve quality that will decrease our cost? And so it's a focus that you first focus on quality. And a lot of the Baldrige winners, by the way, will tell you this, that we used to just look at financials, how much, what our financial costs were and where we stand with that. Then we started looking at just our quality measures. What do we focus on? And we didn't worry about the cost problem so much, whether we were making money, because we knew if we had high quality, our costs would be low. So we looked at those quality measures primarily and changed out and reversed what we used to do. We used to look at quality secondarily after cost, and cost was the big driver. So that's kind of a mind shift that came along with his paradigm. And Joe Duran, which this school has a partnership with the Duran Institute. The son-in-law of Duran is actually running that. And I had actually a chance to meet Joe Duran when he was alive. I was working in the Army. We were working on a concept plan, and he just offered his assistance. He wrote all over it and helped us figure it out. What a great guy, and charged nothing for it, because these guys were really believed in their product. They believed that quality would do good for the world, and they were wealthy, of course, in their own right, but they spent a lot of time lecturing, writing books, and being apostles for quality. And so I was really impressed with him. And he brought, again, a little different flavor than what Deming did. He really helped us set up the Malcolm Baldrige Award, which we'll talk about in a moment. And he also had continued to have a very strong international presence. Duran Institute, for instance, if you really want to get into benchmarking, they currently have do a lot in the oil industry, a lot in the UK, a lot of different nations. They've done a lot of continued international, but they had a really international flavor, is that he thought quality kind of belonged to the world community. And then he wrote some very foundational books that really influenced a lot of folks. He talked about world-class quality and recurred to that and brought those concepts about how do you compare yourself to others in the industry. And he did have a continued sense of urgency, and the cost of quality kind of came out a lot of this from his philosophy is, what does it cost to implement our improvement approaches versus then a return on investment from that. And you'll have a class on that in your financial class later on. And he talked about the commitment of the management, and he had, here's his steps. Again, some organizations kind of took this and ran with it, developed their training programs. They developed quality training programs, taught people facilitation, use of tools, use of Lean Six Sigma approaches. That's kind of what later on got birthed in Lean Six Sigma. Let's do belts. Let's do training on that. That's part of the reason the school kind of sprung up, is that we had this body of knowledge. How do you transfer that to a larger body of, provide in an academic setting, not just training, but academic educational development. And so those were his kind of things. Pareto principle is one of the other things that was very important. You'll be doing Pareto charts later. They're very important as a part of your measure phase, an analysis phase about what's the most important things you need to focus in on. And it's this 20-80% rule. It's kind of like, if you got 5 kids, you probably got 80% of your headaches with, the black sheep in the family. That 20% of your causes of poor quality, or your 80% of your causes of poor quality is probably coming from like 20% of your production or your products or something like that. So that's part of the thing that he brought to the thing we'll talk about a lot much more in your measure phase. And then Feigenbaum really contributed a lot to the body of knowledge. He called total quality control. There used to be, before ASQ, American Society for Quality Control, which was really about how do we ensure things are measured and compliant. They didn't combine with ASQ under a singular body, and he really focused on the production side of this influence. You got the Toyota systems, Lean. We will have a class called the Business Analysis, which is really your Lean course, and you'll hear a lot more from Ishikawa and Ono. He had been involved with, father of the total Toyota Production Center, which later became Lean when a book got written about that. And so these two very influential folks, Ishikawa, or the fishbone diagram, is one of the things you'll be building later for root cause analysis. So he kind of really highlighted that, provided you some tools for this. And Lean and Muda and a lot of the concepts that came out of the Toyota system is your Lean part of your Lean Six Sigma. So these are the guys that are foundational for that. Phil Crosby, which was cost of, really talked about cost of quality, but he also talked about zero defects, this idea that let's see the thing then, the Six Sigma, almost zero defects in that. And he applied that initial concept, and later on Motorola refined it, and that's where they came up with Lean, with a Six Sigma approach, which is almost no defects in anything. And he talked about the price of performance. So, and then he had his zero defects processes and approaches. The other ones that are kind of very important, you'll have a class on balanced scorecard, which is part of your performance measurement. And the concepts from these folks will be that, and that is basically, they came up with 4 quadrants about how do you measure things, learning and growth, employee-related, customer-related, financial and business, which makes a lot of great sense. These, what are you measured in an organization? It's probably these 4 things. And it really influenced strategic planning as well. They grew out of a performance measurement system. This is how you capture metrics. Here's the type of metrics you have, even for these 4 areas to be successful in the business, around your employees, your processes, around the customers you serve, and financial, and has a lot of traction. There's a lot of organizations have a balanced scorecard performance measurement systems built in, and these are the guys who are kind of the founding fathers of that. And that whole body of knowledge now is kind of expanded into strategic planning. You'll have a course on that. Okay. And so the idea of kind of walking through the history, if you give you some background, and also if you haven't been exposed to some of these concepts, I hardly recommend that you may dig deeper, because they're equally true in many cases that we have as when they first put it in. But almost everything that you will have in a Lean Six Sigma approach or quality program will have components of this. And the things that may be missing in those programs, if they're not working well, not hitting the target, often will go back to one of these other things. Maybe there's fear within the workforce. Maybe they haven't thought about variation. Maybe we haven't really thought about a strong customer focus. So these things that we've just covered are then very applicable to an organization. You know, go back and saying, what are some of the things that they recommended? What's missing from our program? Are we doing training? Are we developing people in understanding what quality importance is and providing tools to them? Do we educate them on, you know, how to apply this in the workplace? So those are one of the things we want to provide to you, just kind of a big background. And I know I'm doing a lot of the talking right now. I hope you're still hanging in as we get late, but let me talk about a couple other things that are, I think, are very, very important. One is that in your tag book, your textbook, the one that hopefully you've already gotten and begun reading, is that they talk about these frameworks as mega tools, and they'll talk in the book about the Baldrige and ISO, Motorola and Six Sigma, Lean, benchmarking, and as mega tools. In other words, these are approaches that are distinct, they're unique in many ways, but they're basically approaches to improve an organization, and that's how they covered it in your text. So that's how we reference it there. And one of the big influences in quality, I'm not sure if any of you are involved. Yes, I think Saul, you in your bios, some of you are very much involved with the ISO. And I've been a lead auditor for ISO, and it's one of the things that has, you know, basically international acceptance. If you're certified and you have a third party come in and audit you to these standards, which are accepted and developed by communities that are really international, and they come up and say, what would be acceptable, you know, standards that go across the entire world community or commerce, and what allows us then to say, if you're compliant or you're certified, meaning that you have some level of assurance that this product or service, whatever this organization is producing, will be of high quality. And so ISO sprung out of also right after the war. 25 countries start to get together and say, okay, how do we figure this out so we can, for trade, international commerce, understand what quality would look like. A lot of compliance at the very beginning of this, and it was greatly influenced by the Baldrige. And there's a ISO 9000 2015, and there's versions that come out every 5 years. And that's what you want, because as he indicated in the definitions as we went through, quality evolves. And so the thinking about quality evolves. And so ISO, for instance, every 5 years or cycle, they update the standards to the best thinking in the marketplace. And that's what you want, is continually being competitive. And the body of knowledge, or the standard for an organization, if you want to apply this to a quality management system, ISO 9000, there's variations of that. But basically is that there's standards for almost every industry. I think it's 13485, I think, for like medical devices. There's environmental, 1400s, all sorts of tailored ones to industries. But basically, it's a set of templates. It isn't as specific as it used to be before, but you have to document your processes. It allows you to put in an approach into an organization. And then once you're certified, there is then, some organizations require a supplier to be ISO certified before you can do business with them. And because it allows you to have a common framework to measure another organization's quality. And so they're headquartered in Switzerland, and they mentioned they have a huge amount of different approaches in it. Be glad we'll go into that very much in depth in this course. We just touch upon it to let you know that system's out there. Some of you have great depth in this, but it is a worldwide set of standards is implemented. When I was in the Middle East doing some work, I was absolutely astounded. In Abu Dhabi, I was working for Booz Allen at the time, and went over there. And of course, this is where all your oil money goes, right? Everybody over there. There's no car older than 10 years. Somebody that would be kind of a middle worker was probably making at least 90,000, and the client I was working for was making 90,000, didn't have a staff, a month, and so we went over there, and I was really surprised. All the government agencies were ISO compliant. They were actually all not only compliant, which means that they were using standards. They actually had a third party come in and certify them to these standards, and so that was the way they were changing how they managed the entire government. And there's actually a set of standards for government in ISO as well. But I was amazed, and those organizations that had gone through this, said we couldn't figure out how to do our quality until we figured out our processes, and this is where ISO is very, very helpful. Just lay out that all the key processes in the organization and allows a framework for you to do that in a very logical way. Here's a kind of a stat that I thought was very interesting. Look at this. Who's got the most ISO certified organizations? Well, take a look at your label on your clothes or on the back of any of your electronics, right? Where is it made? And it used to be China didn't have very good quality, but guess what? They have embraced this. And you see this down there? That's the fishmonger warehouse, ISO 9001. Okay, they're selling like fish out of this thing. It's a warehouse, and they're certified. And the upward trend of that has been astronomical. So they're improving their quality. And where's all our manufacturing jobs? Well, take a look at the U.S. It's got 25K are certified. There's a lot of good reasons for this. Sometimes it is tedious. It does take a lot of work to put into it. But it also talks about investment in quality and what the return will be if you don't do that. So this is probably the most rapid growth has been overseas in ISO. And this is derived from a 2011 survey. So I haven't seen anything more recent, but I suspect they've been expanding far beyond that. And just look at the national economy. So if you want to be competitive, you really need to understand quality, and that's one of them. And this is the other reason why Malcolm Baldrige came about. I had the good fortune to be on the National Board of Examiners. Malcolm Baldrige, probably one of the best things I ever did in my life. This is something that I've always used in all of my consulting, use this framework. And let's talk about it for a bit. It came about again in 1987, and the idea was, with the quality movement that got born and got traction, is that Congress said, let's figure out how we can help stimulate the quality learning across industries in the United States. And what they did is that they then brought together, under the Department of Commerce, people from academia, colleges, universities, and they brought people from the government, and they brought people in from the private sector. And they identified those extremely high-performing organizations that everybody kind of recognized as being the role models, you know, the FedExes, the Motorola's, you know, others, Rich Carlton. And they started to look at the practices that they had. And they went out and did a study, and this basically looked at all these high-performing organizations, and they started to categorize their best practices. What did they do? Okay, and the idea is that if we capture that, then we can share that with other organizations, and then they can emulate their behavior and be really successful like they were. And so basically this is a compendium of best business practices, the Baldrige criteria. And then it took off. It really became, in fact, the President of the United States shakes the hand of the winners, or has been in that. When I was an examiner, you know, the President would actually show up and recognize these organizations that won the Baldrige as role models, as the leaders in the United States, and ones that actually after they win the award, they had to be an open house for a year. Anybody wanted to come benchmark them, talk with them, et cetera, and they would get thousands of requests each year. So that is its genesis. And it's been used all over the place. In the public sector, there was a private Presidential Quality Award. In the military, it's actually was used in Army Communities of Excellence. They had like $1 million award for the winners of the Baldrige-based Army Communities of Excellence that you applied this because they just found it to be a very good framework to evaluate organizations. The state of New Mexico uses the criteria, for instance, in helping certify schools. It's huge in education and healthcare, and expanded into not-for-profit sectors. So education, health has been added, and they're very, very big. So let's talk a little bit about that. You can use this, and we'll talk about this. We'll come back into it. It's a model for helping think about organizations as a system. This is what I used to call the galactic hamburger. You know, kind of look at it, it kind of looks like that. You got the, you know, the all meat, you know, you got the bun on the top, and then you got the all meat patty at the bottom, and then you got this kind of condiments in the middle. But basically this is that they broke down the organizations. I said best practices, and they put them into categories and said leadership as a category, strategic planning, and customers. And what are their approaches for each one of these? And the nice thing about this is that everything you do in an organization can be correlated back to this. You can put into this breakdown an organization. It's kind of like breaking down the organization and saying what are the various subsets of it, what are the systems in it. And the idea is that leadership and strategic planning, customer, workforce, and operations is really about processes, about improving processes. All of these should develop and deliver results. In other words, you capture results. You should look at an organization and through each one of these things and how well they're doing each. You know, do they have a good way to identify their customers and capture their feedback, and do they have a good way to ensure they have great relationships with them? Then how do they take that information and then use it to figure out what processes to improve? What information from your customers do I need to tell my workforce so I can train them on it? And so that was kind of the idea. It's a systems view. These are all interconnected. And at the bottom, the measurement and analysis and knowledge, that's the information, basically, that comes into the organization. And how do you treat that information and figure out how to do performance metrics? And how do you turn that, you know, raw knowledge into something used to make decisions? And so it influences everything above it. That's kind of the model. We can talk a little bit more later on, because every organization I've gone into, I always think of it in this way. I see it through these parameters and viewpoints. I say, what's the leadership system? What are the leaders doing? What are they doing in strategic planning? What are the customer focus? And if one of these is out of kilter, in other words, they're not doing it or not doing it at a level that will be necessary for them to be successful in the other parts, then we start working on that. So it's an enterprise view, it's a systems view, it's very valuable, and you can use it in your own projects. So let's, they changed the model a bit. They put core values at the bottom, and we're going to talk about that briefly here tonight. And here are the set of core values. And this is what your paper is going to be about, okay? Your assignments are going to be 11 core values here, and I want you to read in the Baldrige criteria. You download it. It's got a reference in where you get it from the NIST site or from ASQ. And then you say, how do I see these 11 values in my organization? Are they customer focused? In other words, we tie everything directly back to a customer. Is there a strong customer focus in our organization? External, in this definition, is a customer is outside the organization box. Is our leadership visionary? In other words, are they setting up the environment to be successful? Are they looking into the future? Are they active players in the organization, or are they more of a manager? In other words, are they just looking at the statistics, looking at the numbers, but not taking care of setting up the environment for success, motivating people, and what is their role? Focus on success is really about planning. Are they looking at what is the planning processes? Are they focused on the future? Or is that really evident in the organization? Is it very clear what our priorities and what our goals and our objectives are? Do they take care of the people in the organization? Are they sufficiently trained? Do we have the right skill sets? Do we have them highly motivated? Do we deliver value and results? In other words, we can charge a lot of money for something that we provide, but are we actually adding value back to the customer? So they're focused both on adding value and results. That making a great product and that provides great value. Is there a systems perspective, kind of thinking through things? You know, when we make a change, is it one department fighting against another department? Are we realizing that if we make a change to a process, we have to change maybe the way we recruit people or maybe train the people? And that's kind of that thing. Are we agile? Are we able to change, or it takes a long time for us to make a shift? Are we quickly able to respond to something? If it's something going on in the organization, maybe a new market, maybe it's new competitors coming into it, maybe it's a change in the fact that we're going to have less money, and that we can quickly adapt to how we're going to change our processes or reduce our costs or something like that. So the idea of organizational agility means that we're able to quickly learn, and do we learn from our mistakes? In other words, we don't compete doing them over and over again. Do we have ways to foster innovations, bringing the best new ideas from the workforce? Management by fact, do we measure stuff? Do we make decisions primarily by looking at data? Are we good neighbors, responsible environmentally? Do we ensure we don't violate codes or do something that's unethical? And do we have that transparency in that? So those are kind of the core values in a very highlight summary. What I'd like you to do in the criteria, in the Baldrige criteria, there are definitions of that. Read those definitions, and then for your assignment, a 4-page paper at the max, is that take the core values and each one of them and think about where you currently work or an organization you're very familiar with, and say, what are the things that I see that are evidence of these core values? So I want you to practically apply these values. Which ones are present in the organization? And some of these may not be present. They may be absent from your organization. And then just write about that. So you take the 11 values, each one of them, and say, which ones are really strong in our organization? We have very strong customer focus, but maybe we don't value our people so much. We don't have any way to get new ideas. We don't do innovation very well, but we do, have very visionary leaders. They're very active and very involved. So that's the type of thing I want you to think about. When we go through that, we'll circle back to that discussion. And be sure to check there's a template in the portal for you to use to write the paper. An abstract is not necessary for this paper, but double space and be sure you're compliant with all the other requirements, and we'll upload that into the portal by next week. So, all right. Well, I'm at 10 o'clock, so I'm going to, I know I poured a lot of stuff out again, and part of this is by design, just to kind of give you an overview, and then later we'll kind of circle back on these concepts and reinforce them with you. So what questions do you have, or any other comments from what we've covered tonight? I've been pretty much looking at the phone here as I chat, so let me see what we got for chats. Okay. All right. Anybody have any comments, or you learn anything particular or anything new that you want to share? Is that the sound of your head hitting the desk? Thank goodness he's quit talking.
I have a question or comment.
What was that, Judith?
Judith, yes. And so you stated that quality was introduced to Japan in 1947 by Mr. Edward Deming. So, as everyone knows, the vehicles, the automobiles coming from Japan are highly valued by some. So their level of quality and the way they respond when they have like the recalls from the airbags and so on and so forth, will that be attributed to what they've learned from Mr. Deming's lectures and how he introduced quality to Japan?
Yeah, well, he spent a long time in working with the leadership, and he focused on, one, you got to build something that is important to your customers, and back in the 80s, I don't think there was, when he was around, any of the airbags and that type of thing. But basically, is that his approaches, which was be customer focused, get people's input about what they want, and then really improve your processes and look at how you do your manufacturing and look at variation and those type of things. So the very specific things like airbags or other innovations, but they did challenge them. And one of the things about one of the quality values is innovation, is how do you continually move the technology forward. And so I think his principles kind of lived on regardless of the specific areas in here. The automotive industry is a lot more, much stronger, and if you compare it where it was in the 80s, it's significantly better than it was, and a lot of the things that came out in the 90s in the cars, late 90s and 2000s, greatly improved the quality trajectory, and those technologies got included. So,
thank you, sir.
Hey, if you want to drop off, I want to wish you all a good evening. Appreciate your participation. I'll hang on and let anybody else have any questions. But I thank you for your time and your attention tonight. And if you got any questions about the assignment, one other, if you would, when you write your file up and you upload it, put your last name first. It's just helpful for me when I grade papers that I have you already. I can sort you by alphabetical. So if you put your name and then like core values 501, I know what the assignment is. So when you upload it, it's a lot easier for me to grade, so you don't get somebody else's grade. That's just in the file name itself. So when you save it down, ensure that, and then be sure your paper complies to the other requirements for a good paper. So thank you, folks. Have a good evening, and I'll hang on if anybody would like to